When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
To new friends.
I don't find them that pleasant to be around.
This Friday, I guarantee you won't want to leave.
Speak No Evil is filled with teeth-clenching, seat-clawing suspense.
Something's not right with him.
I've always wanted a family like yours.
James McAvoy will scare you speechless.
Oh! You're gonna kill us.
We're just sad to see you go.
Speak No Evil. Rated R. Under 17. Not admitted without parent. Only in theaters Friday.
Slow Burn Media, Evergreen Podcasts, and Killer Podcasts presents Who Killed, a podcast that provides a voice for the voiceless.
An Idaho judge granted a change of venue request for accused killer Brian Kohberger. Kohberger is accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students in 2022. Now, the judge sided with the defense's request, calling it the most difficult decision of his career. Kohberger's defense team argued that potential jurors from Latah County would most likely have biased views of their client due to the intense media interest and coverage in the case. Defense attorneys suggested moving the trial about 300 miles away to the Boise area. The judge has not confirmed, though, where the trial will take place.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Who Killed. I'm your host, Bill Huffman, and this is a Slow Burn Media, Evergreen Podcasts, and Killer Podcast production. On this week's episode, I am joined by our resident law expert, the one and only Matt Mangino. And Matt, absolutely thank you so much for coming on the show. I hear there's been an update in Idaho.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I appreciate it.
What's the latest?
Well, it's interesting. There's been a flurry of motions filed. Probably the biggest news is that the judge in the case has agreed to the defense's request for a change of venue. So this is going to be a trial in a different county than where the crime occurred. There's 2 different options. In a situation like that. You can get what's called a change of venue, which means you move the trial to another county, to another courthouse, or you can get what's called a change of venire, which means you go out to a different county, you pick a jury, and you bring that jury back to the county where the crime occurred. So in this case, it's a change of venue, and part of that reason is because the judge essentially said we don't have the resources, the security, in the other means to have this case tried in our county. So not only is it an issue of, potentially the jury pool being tainted by the media coverage, but it's also an issue of the capability. I believe the county has about 41,000 residents. Just to pick a jury, the judge estimated there'd be thousands of potential jurors. And they just don't have the resources or ability to try a case like that. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see, where in Idaho this case ends up, because again, a lot of the counties, I would assume, in Idaho are rural counties, probably smaller than this college community itself. So there's going to be limited places. The judge did not direct where this case would be tried. He's left it up to the state Supreme Court administrator to make that determination. But I think we'll learn pretty soon where it's going to be tried. In my understanding is that it's the court administration who will make that decision, and I would assume what they're going to do is they're going to look first at the map and determine, which particular areas have the resources to try a case like this, and to have a large enough jury pool to pick from, and then I would think they're going to call these counties and say, hey, how would you like to try this case in your county? So you're going to get a new judge, you're going to get a new location, and you're going to get a new jury pool.
It makes you wonder if it's going to end up in a city like Boise.
That you think that they're going to have to go to, the larger, more metropolitan areas of Idaho if they're gonna feel comfortable that they have the resources they need to see this case through.
You're absolutely right about it being rural, and the further north you go, as you know, the Idaho Peninsula is infamous for being the land of white supremacy, so probably not the best place to hold a trial.
I had a chance actually to visit that area and to visit Idaho a couple of years ago. And I was at Idaho State, not the University of Idaho, which is an interesting place because their football stadium is indoors. They have a roof over their field. It's kind of like a mini dome. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see how they how this plays out in terms of the location and selection where this this trial begins. The other issue is one of the things that courts are often concerned about when they change venue is if this trial moves to a place miles and miles away, if you wanted to have the jury there to see the crime scene, logistically, how does that work, and is it practical to do that? But here, the building's gone. There is no crime scene, so that's really not going to be an issue in this case. So they can move it away because I don't see any reason why you would have to bring this jury, back to Moscow, to do this.
Do you think this is something that they're actually going to reconstruct for the case, like the house, or just possibly the rooms?
I would think, if anything, they're going to do it sort of digitally, with technology. Right, 30 years ago, maybe, you would consider I'm going to build a structure that's the exact dimensions of this room, but that's not. I don't think that's going to happen.
Who cannot forget the Ted Kaczynski case where they actually brought the shed into the courthouse and into the courtroom, and it really showed how small of a place that this lunatic was living.
Yeah, I don't anticipate any sort of theatrics like that. It's gonna be what you can watch, any night on television if you're watching, some crime television show or something like that. It's all going to be graphics.
I assumed it would be digital, but the death penalty. We've talked about the death penalty in the past and how Idaho is similar to Pennsylvania, where it's on the books, but it's not really used on the regular. I'm going to have to ask if this case is going to be something that they use as a bargaining chip, or is it actually going to be taken to the end and death will be on the table?
Well, I think that they've made several arguments or proposed arguments to the court with regard to the death penalty, and frankly, some of these are interesting arguments. By and large, every state that has the death penalty, and there's fewer and fewer, but every state that has the death penalty, has a certain scheme that's been approved by the United States Supreme Court. So if we go back to 1972 and Furman versus Georgia, the Supreme Court said that the death penalty didn't say that it was unconstitutional. What they said, it was unfair. It was arbitrary in the way it was being imposed. So what that meant was, the death penalty in Pennsylvania and how you get to that point might be completely different than the death penalty in South Carolina or in Ohio. And so what the court said is, we're not going to do away with the death penalty, but we're going to stop the death penalty because it's arbitrary right now. And so states came back very quickly, rewrote their laws, and now we're in a situation in which I refer to as the modern era of the death penalty. And in that sort of modern era of the death penalty, the basic changes that occurred in every state that conform with the Supreme Court's decision is that, number one, you have a bifurcated trial. So what's meant by that is, number one, you have two phases to the trial. The guilt phase, where they determine whether or not you're guilty or not guilty of first-degree murder. And then the penalty phase. Should you get the death penalty or life in prison? So that was one major change. The next major change was, at least the thought was, that we're going to only apply the death penalty to the worst of the worst. So not only do you have to be charged with first-degree murder, planned, premeditated murder, but there also has to be aggravating circumstances that exist, which means that you committed this crime in a manner that sets it apart from other crimes. And what the court would do is, the states would establish what these aggravating circumstances are. And then the defense in this guilt phase would have the right to present mitigating evidence. And if the aggravating evidence outweighs the mitigating evidence, then the jury should impose the death penalty. So in this case, there are, I think, 5 aggravating circumstances, that there were multiple murders, that these murders were committed while committing another felony, which was the burglary going into the home. And then, there's, disregard for human life, particularly heinous crime, and a propensity to commit murder. Now, why I wanted to mention those 5 is because what has happened over time is that the death penalty is really no longer, for the worst of the worst. Okay, because the legislatures have watered down the aggravating circumstances. Okay, so initially it was like, if you killed a child, if you committed multiple murders, if you murdered a pregnant woman, if you tortured somebody in the process, so those kind of things really separated it from other first-degree murder cases. Now you have aggravating circumstances like it's a particularly heinous crime. I mean, murder is, should we be thinking about, well, did he kill him in a good way or a bad way? I mean, that's a catch-all that makes every first-degree murder potentially subject to the death penalty, because you can say every murder is heinous. I mean, what murder is not heinous? Okay. Yeah, right. And then the other one is, in this case, is a disregard for human life. Okay. I mean, you murdered somebody. I mean, that's a pretty substantial disregard for human life. Okay. So again, that's a catch-all. So in a way, it's been diluted. And so in this case, ultimately, if there's a conviction of first-degree murder, then the state has to prove these aggravating circumstances outweigh any mitigation that the defense would present.
The way we look at cases and the way that the public and pop culture are portrayed in the Hollywood machine is that everything's cut and dry and everything is resolved pretty quickly. Clearly, this is not always the case. Are you, having been on both sides of this aisle, are they just doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as attorneys go?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is what the prosecution has to do. The prosecution, is required, to put the defense on notice that we're going to seek the death penalty, and these are the 5 reasons why. Now, certainly this is a case in which, 4 young people were savagely and brutalized and murdered. So yeah, I mean, there's aggravating circumstances here. I mean, I don't know that you need to have the overkill, with some of the other issues, but this is a multiple murder. If you were in some way able to make a separation between what's heinous and what isn't, I think this qualifies on the heinous side. Certainly, the brutal way these 4 young people were murdered. So I'm not necessarily saying that that this is flimsy. I think there's strong aggravating circumstances in this case if he's convicted of first degree murder. The other thing that you have to think about when you think about it, a jury in a death penalty case, which is different than any other case, is that jurors have to be death qualified. Okay, which means when you're going through voir dire and you're asking these jurors questions, one of the questions that you ask is, if the law and the facts support it, can you impose the death penalty? If you're a juror and you say, no, I can't do that, you're gone. Okay, so that death qualification means that whatever jurors are selected in this case, they've already said they can impose the death penalty if the law and the facts support that. So, you're kind of already leaning toward there. I mean, you have a group of people who say, yeah, I support the death penalty. And if you look at, polling, that eliminates about half of the population, because half of the population say they're opposed to the death penalty. And if those people come in and they're honest and they say, hey, I can't do it, I'm opposed to the death penalty, they're disqualified. And, you're cutting a big chunk out of your jury pool just on that issue alone.
You've had a lot of experience with the death penalty, and you can go ahead and talk about your book, because that is one of those things that's basically one of those cases where people get to make their own decision. And go ahead and pitch your book a little bit, because I really think it's an interesting read, and I think the audience would enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Bill. So my book is The Executioner's Toll, 2010. And it's published by McFarlane and Company. And, what I did when I thought about this book is, having been a defense attorney and having been a prosecutor who tried, death penalty cases, I was interested in death penalty, and I also was interested in how sort of the jurisprudence with regard to the death penalty is kind of seeped into other areas of the criminal justice system. And so, one thing that I always found when I was reading about the death penalty or researching the death penalty is that almost everybody wrote from a certain bias. So if you supported the death penalty, you cherry picked all the cases that jumped out and said, this is why we have a death penalty. And if you were opposed to the death penalty, you did the same thing. You cherry picked the bad cases in terms of the death penalty. What I thought I would do is I said, let's how can we do this in a way that is almost a statistical sort of analysis, that we're going to have a random sample that we can take a look at. And one way I thought of doing it, I said, let's just take 1 year in the death penalty, 2010. There were 46 executions that year. So I thought, let's talk about the crimes, the trials, the appeals, and everything down to the last mill and the last word. But then also work in the constitutional law that has been so important with regard to the death penalty in the criminal justice system, period. And look at those 46 cases, and the reader can decide whether or not they support the death penalty. And so that was kind of my objective. And, I think if you read the book, it gives you an opportunity, to weigh these things. And, sometimes, and I've talked to people who've read the book that, that's great. I went in there thinking, this is going to resolve how I feel or what I think of the death penalty. And it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy conclusion to come to. No, no. And a lot of people want it to be black and white. And a lot of people want everything to be black and white. And guess what? Nothing is black and white. And yeah. And if you want to, if you want to walk around and think you have all the answers, well,
We have seen a lot of cases where
that
you
doesn't
can walk
work.
around and think that you are the smartest person in the room and you have all the answers.
Yeah.
And we can see what hubris does and a lot of terrible things that occur from it. So when you ride around on your high horse, don't be surprised if you get knocked off.
Well, and Bill, I think that the issue with that is that it's easy to want to say things are black and white. You don't have to think about them. Okay. So that's easy. I mean, this is the way it is. The death penalty is good. Murderer should be executed. When I talk with people like that, it's typically people who don't want to think it through. They don't want to critically think, so why is the death penalty good in this situation? Why is it bad in this situation? How do we reconcile those differences? That's hard work. You got to think about that. And you really got to spend some time. And if you don't want to think about it, then, hey, I'm 100% for the death penalty all the time. Makes it easy.
Sometimes I think that if you don't look around and don't acknowledge what is going on in the world, then you may wake up one day and things will have changed for the worst and you will not have had much to say about it.
Yeah, I think now more than ever in the fall of 2024, people have to critically think about everything that they're doing and every decision that they're going to make in these next 56 days. Yeah, I mean, I think whatever decision people make, look at it critically. I mean, examine it. Try to figure out why you're making the decision that you are. I mean, certainly, not every decision has to be, critically analyzed. I mean, do I want a Coke or do I want a Pepsi? I mean, yeah, you're not going to sit down and ponder that for a few minutes, but there's some important decisions that need that type of critical analysis to make an informed decision.
With that being said, and with what came out last week from the DOJ and their misinformation operation through social media influencers, it is very hard for me to not believe that they didn't know where the money was coming from, or they just didn't look very hard because it was just so much money. But again, you have a lot of people out there that are just going around and saying things because people are giving them money to do so. And, parenting is important. And sometimes these parents aren't teaching their kids to critically think about stuff and look at what's going on in certain aspects of the party where you have people running around saying that the Haitians are eating animals and ducks and dogs in Springfield, Ohio, when that has been completely debunked. But unfortunately, we live in a country and in a state of being where this has become commonplace.
And it's not just one particular group or one particular segment of the of our culture. I mean, we've become sort of entrapped in this continuous motor of information, and being accepting of that that motor of information that's being churned out, and accepting it at face value. I think there was a time in this country when most of our news came from Walter Cronkite and his colleagues, and it was non-biased. It was just news for you to take, and you trusted that, and I think there were certain, newspapers that you trusted, whether it was the New York Times, or the Chicago Tribune or whatever newspaper it was. So when you read that information, you could trust that it was fact checked, that it was as unbiased as possible, and that you could rely on it. So that's, the way we were sort of programmed, so that's what television did for us in the early years. That's what newspapers did for us. You could read it, you could make up your own mind. Now you can get news or information from thousands of different sources. And I think we're still programmed to think, well, I'm watching this on television or on my screen. It's got to be reliable. I'm listening to these people talk about this issue, this, crazy conspiracy theory that Haitians are eating, Haitian immigrants are eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. And you believe it because it's on TV, because, it's on the internet. And that's a real problem. And that's not, it's not just a political problem that has implications, through, all the institutions.
Implications for sure. I mean, look at education. I mean, our rankings worldwide have gone down every year since we've started teaching the test. My ex-wife was a teacher, and she would teach her kindergartners how to take the test. And
well, Bill, and I think you hit on another issue that I think is so important. It is, and we talked about critical thinking a moment ago, but we've moved away from the liberal arts education. Okay, as you said, we prepare students for exams. We want specialization in our learning, and listen, I think it's important, to learn a skill, to be specialized in something, but you need that liberal arts background so that you understand history and you understand literature and you understand its importance. So you're not out there supporting book banning and book burning, and you know history, so you understand how history can repeat itself and how we can look at history to help form a path forward. That's a liberal arts education, and I think every student needs it, whether you're going to be a welder, a nurse, a teacher, a pharmacist, a doctor. It doesn't matter.
It's also so we don't repeat ourselves and we don't continue down this path that we've seen in movies before. They don't ever end well. And this one isn't going to end well if we continue down this path.
Right. And if you don't know about it, or your knowledge historically is superficial, then you don't see the similarities. You don't see the trouble that could be brewing ahead.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. If you don't understand the past, then how do you ever prevent making the same mistakes in the future? I just think the idea of a liberal arts education not being as important as it once was is very much a disservice to this nation and for the minds of our children, because the fact is they're not critically thinking, and it blows my mind.
And I think it's we're heading for disaster if we completely abandon the history, the literature, the things like that help us understand the world around us.
The history, the literature, things that like that we talk, and they bring up an interesting point, because I think about the education that I received, and I know it was sanitized. I mean, I didn't learn about the Tulsa race riots until I was older. They were completely whitewashed. I mean, how many times did we have Pilgrim Indian Day, on Thanksgiving? And I'm sure they still do it to a degree, but again, we weren't really told what really happened. I mean, the Osage tribe should have probably kept their oil money and probably shouldn't have been white men in charge of their deeds and all the things that have come from these horrible events in the past. I mean, if you don't know these histories of these parties, these individuals, it's just going to basically create a environment that is not going to be beneficial for anybody.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think what a liberal arts education does is, obviously you can't learn everything. You're not going to learn about every incident that occurred everywhere in the country or around the world. But what I think it does is it gets people interested in wanting to know more. So if you learn the basics, if you're introduced to war and conflict and government and all these different things, relationships between countries, maybe it's going to pique your interest, and you're going to want to learn more. So that you've learned about Tom Crow, you learned about the Civil War, you learned about Tom Crow, you learned about race relations in this country. Maybe that ultimately leads you to learn more, and you learn about the Tulsa massacre, and you learn, so your interest has been prodded by learning the basics. And so you learned about the Nazis in World War II, and you learned about the atrocities that they committed, and you learned about unilaterally invading Poland and starting World War II. But maybe you want to learn more about the run up to it. How did Adolf Hitler, how did he get elected in 1932? Right. And what role did violence play in Germany itself with the rise so now you learn those basics, and hey, I want to learn a little bit more. And then you really get a grasp historically about how these things can occur right under the nose of law-abiding, good people who are raising their family.
It's not like in Germany, everybody was a Nazi. It just wasn't the way it was. I mean, the whole feeling on this is, let's just not go down that path, and let's continue moving forward, onward and upward. And speaking of that, there is another case that is moving forward, and that would be one of Delphi and Richard Allen. Mm-hmm. Have you heard anything about that case lately?
Yeah, no, I know about the case and have been following it and talking about it, but I haven't kept up in the last few days or weeks.
Yeah, nothing's really changed in the last few days, but in the last few weeks there were some rulings that I believe they couldn't use certain evidence in their defense.
Yeah, I think I read that they can't use the third party defendant or point the finger at somebody else, and we've seen that in other high profile cases, where the courts have prohibited the ability to bring in to basically try somebody else in the middle of the trial of the defendant.
What's the reasoning behind that? I mean, they can't bring up another possible killer?
Well, I think the reasoning with regard to situations like that is that there has to be, some legitimate basis for it. Okay, so I think the courts, they scrutinize, what someone wants to say, what evidence they want to present. I mean, obviously, in most situations where you're going to point the finger at a third party, what you're doing is just trying to make the water murky and make it difficult for jurors to sort things out. I mean, it'd be wonderful, if you're a defendant to be trying somebody else in the middle of your in the middle of your own trial, and unless there's really something substantial that would support that, the courts are reluctant to let you do it.
So as a layman, I guess that's pretty normal for not allowing that type of action within the actual case.
Yeah, I would say more often than not, courts are not going to permit you to do that unless you really have some compelling evidence that could be presented. I was thinking of Sam Shepard.
Oh yeah, that
was
city is very close to my heart, and it's right next to the city where I grew up. Also, where the Amy Mihaljevic case takes place.
Yeah, that was Cleveland. Yeah, and that was F. Lee Bailey. That's what launched his career as kind of a superstar defense attorney. And then all the way through O.J. Simpson. But yeah, I mean, it's. I can't think off the top of my head any high-profile cases that I recall where someone has effectively used a third-party perpetrator, so to speak.
Yeah, I get it from a law perspective. I just think it kind of limits your defense, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that judges, try to give the benefit of the doubt, to defendants if they have legitimate claims. But we see every day, motions in limine, pretrial motions, suppression motions where you're trying to keep evidence out of a case, or you're trying to find out, how the prosecution is going to present their evidence through motions in limine and those kind of things. And I would say that, significant majority of those, are in favor of the prosecution. It's not easy to suppress evidence, and the Supreme Court has made it more and more difficult by limiting the number of situations in which you are going to be able to, suppress evidence. That's why, more than 95% of cases end up in pleas, because not that the deck is stacked against defendants, but, we've seen a lot of decisions from the Warren Court that gave a lot of rights to individual defendants kind of be chiseled away. And, prosecutors have resources and investigators. And, most defendants are represented, by public defenders, the public defender or court-appointed counsel. So the resources aren't there to mount a battle against a party that has resources and, at least in the modern era, favorable decisions on admissible evidence.
My high school teacher, Dennis Cranack, once said that if you had a grand jury convening to determine your possible guilt, you were probably already screwed.
Yeah. Well, that's funny. Henry Morgenthau, who was the district attorney in New York City, and you talk about a grand jury being convened to determine, whether or not someone's going to be indicted. And Morgenthau said that he could indict a ham sandwich. It was that easy to get an indictment in front of a grand jury because the defendant's not there and there's no cross-examination. And, yeah, he made it pretty clear how easy it was to get an indictment in New York City.
As a Clevelander and having to be burdened with the one and only Deshaun Watson as our quarterback, I mean, he went through 2 grand juries in Texas, and neither of those returned an indictment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you don't, those are kind of unique situations. There's so many different dynamics at play there. I mean, obviously he's well known. He's a celebrity athlete. Are celebrity athletes and celebrities generally, are they vulnerable to people making accusations against them? Are there, we know that Deshaun Watson settled a lot of cases, and we don't know what they, were they nominal amounts just to get these people to go away so they wouldn't bother him, or are these legitimate claims in which he paid lots and lots of money? We don't really know that, but we do know that he seems to be the target more often than other people. So where there's smoke, I would assume there's fire. Yeah, well, you could be the Pittsburgh Steelers now, who this past weekend, the opening weekend, their offensive player of the game is the kicker. I don't know how that bodes for the future, but Boswell is going to probably need to ice himself down after games if they keep this up.
I mean, he was just always so dynamic at Ohio State. I mean, he's just been perpetually putting up field goals.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened to his offensive rhythm.
Yeah, you got to turn it on in the red zone.
Anyway, Matt, thanks so much. It has been a pleasure. I know you have other appointments and other things to do. So thank you so much for coming on this week. And where can people find you, and where do you do most of your TV hits these days?
Well, I've been doing a lot of court TV, which is a lot of fun. I write a weekly column for Creators Syndicate, and that started at the first of the year. So you can find those at Creators and in different newspapers across the country. So that's a lot of fun. And of course, my book is available, on all the normal sites where you would find a book, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can go directly to McFarland and Company, my publisher as well. And, you can find me, Twitter, it's Matthew T. Mangino, or X? It's Matthew T. Mangino. And my blog is mattmangino.com. I write every day, sometimes more than once a day. So you can check me out there as well. Yeah. So, but Bill, thanks for having me. It's always great to be on your show. And I think you do a fantastic job, for your followers and viewers. It's a great podcast.
Thanks, Matt. I really do appreciate it. And I did love seeing you at CrimeCon.
Yeah, that was great. It's always fun to be there and see all the ID addicts. Thank you, Bill.
I will see you then. But until next time, thank you very much. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this week's new episode of Who Killed. I was lucky enough to have the one and only Matt Mangino on hand to discuss the latest in the Idaho 4 case. Hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of perspective on when that case will head to trial and where it will be held. Until then, I'll be producing new episodes, as I have not been doing much of this summer because of a variety of reasons. But we are going to be back in the swing of things, and this is just the first of many new episodes to come. So, as you know, going forward, I release new episodes every Friday, and I also do a presser of the week on occasion. And so, if you are interested in following me on Twitter, you can do so at BillHuffman3. It is opinionated and political sometimes, so just warning you now. Anyway, in the meantime, as always, until next time, stay healthy and be safe.
I want to take a moment to tell you about my podcast, Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage. In 1984, a woman named Phyllis Cottle was abducted in broad daylight, tortured, and left to die in a burning car in Akron, Ohio. At the time, I was a rookie reporter covering this horrific story. Since then, I've reported every kind of crime imaginable. I've been able to leave most of them at work, but not this one, the one that buried itself under my skin and stayed put. Phyllis Cottle was a badass woman, and I want to tell you her story. A production of Evergreen Podcasts and signature title of the Killer Podcast Network, you can find Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage wherever you get your podcasts. Discover more great true crime and paranormal programming at killerpodcast.com.
The truth about the Haditha massacre has been covered up, but not anymore.
I know you know what happened.
They went into houses and killed women and children.
What are you thinking?
What a mess.
U.S. Marines murdered innocent civilians in cold blood.
And at the center of it all
is 25-year-old Sergeant Frank Wuderick.
And me. Murder in House 2. A new podcast from Crowd Network.